Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheilla with this week's story. Our story is called The Burnt Composition. Nettie came rushing down to her mother. Mama, it's finished. My composition is all done. Now, Nettie was 12, and this was probably one of the first compositions she'd ever written. And it was a big deal. She said, "Oh, Mama, will you please read it and tell me that it's good?" Mr. Mason, the school teacher, had explained to the children that there was going to be a prize for the child that turned in the best composition. That prize was going to be a desk with a little silver plaque on it with the name of the student on it. But the rules were nobody could help the student. They had to do it all on their own, and they were going to be judged on what was written in it as well as how neat they were. Well, Nettie was so excited. Her mother was sitting there sewing, and she put her sewing aside, and she said, "Here, let me look at it." So Nettie gave her all those pages, and her mother read through it, and she said, "It seems to be all there. It seems to be really good, and it's written very neatly." Well, in those days, they didn't have pens like we have. They had pens that you had to fill with ink, and the part you wrote with was not like the little ball on our ballpoint pens. The ink had to flow down to this little piece of metal at the end, and it was very, very hard to write a whole paper without having ink blots on it. Mother said, "There's not one blot on the whole thing. It's wonderful." And Nettie said, I know that I won't get that desk. I know we're pretty sure that Hattie will get that. She writes beautifully. Her only problem is that she often has a lot of blots on hers, but this time I'm sure she'll try real hard not to have any. Nettie, she looked at her mom and she said, "Mom, could you get me some ribbon? I want to roll it up like a scroll, and we can tie ribbon on it." Well, Mother went off to get the ribbon, and when she came back, she'd found dainty, lacy ribbon, and she tied it very neatly, almost reverently. Nettie picked up that work that she'd done, and she carried it into the other room where she and her sisters studied, and she put it inside of her desk. She was so glad to be done. It hadn't been easy for her. It was hard. She was 12, but writing a composition was hard. She was so pleased that it was done. There was a week till the end of school, and when there was examinations. So she was glad that it was done. Well, while she was sitting in that study room, her cousin, Amy, came rushing in, and Amy said, "Nettie, are you done with your composition yet?" And Nettie smiled. She said, "It's all done. It's here in my desk. I'm so glad to be done." Well, Nettie oftentimes helped her cousin that was about her age. She just had a hard time doing her homework a lot of times. She couldn't figure out her math problems and things, and she'd come ask for help from Nettie. She just lived down the road. Well, here was Amy again. And she said, Nettie, you just got to help me. I want to earn one of those prizes, and I can't think of anything to write about. You've got to help me write it. Help me write the composition. And Nettie looked at her and she said, You know I can't help you to write it. Mr. Mason said nobody was to get any help, not even from their parents. I can't help you. Well, Amy looked at her and said, Your mother helped you. And Nettie said, No, she didn't. She just read it when it was done. She didn't help me write any of it or think of what I should write. Well, Amy was mad, and Amy was known to have a hot, quick temper. She looked at Nettie and she said, You've got to help me. You just have to. And she kept begging and pleading. And Amy said, I can't help you on this. It wouldn't be honest. It wouldn't be honorable. It would be merely helping you cheat. I can't do that. Amy got madder and madder and madder. Oh, fists were in fists. And Natty was feeling worse and worse. She would have liked to have helped her, but she knew she couldn't, that it was wrong. And she told her that. And while she was standing there looking at Amy, Amy ran over to that desk and she grabbed Nettie's composition, all rolled up with its pretty ribbons on it, and she rushed over to the fireplace and she threw it on the hot coals in the open fireplace. Nettie couldn't believe it. All she could say was, Oh, no, 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 Amy. And as both girls stood there in shock, Nettie, because her prized work was going up in smoke, and Amy, because she suddenly realized what she had done, and she was sorry. But how can you fix something like this? Nettie didn't say another word. She turned around and she went up the staircase to her room, and she shut the door and locked it behind her. She sat down on her bed and she burst into tears. Oh, why did she have to do that? Why? And Nettie was mad at her. And she didn't have to do that. I couldn't help her. It wouldn't have been right. I couldn't help her. Why did she have to destroy my composition? And Nettie sat there talking to herself. There was no more time left to write a new composition. Even though she knew what was in the old one, she knew she couldn't do it in time. This was examination week, and she had to study for her tests. And she thought, I'll never forgive Amy. I'll never forgive her. She should have not done this. Why? Why did she do this? I won't forgive her. I hope she feels horrible. Oh, I hope she feels so bad. And then her mind started thinking other things. I'm being revengeful. I'm being selfish. I don't want to forgive her. I can't forgive her. And she kept talking to herself. And then she remembered that about a month before this time, she had had a talk with Jesus. And she'd asked him to help her to be a good Christian and to be kind and forgiving. Forgiving. Oh, she had to forgive Amy and she didn't want to. She battled upstairs in her room for a long, long time. Finally, she knelt down by her bed and she talked to Jesus. She said, "Oh, Jesus, I know the feelings I have toward Amy aren't right. Can you help me forgive her? I just can't, Lord. Please help me." And then she remembered something, the Lord's Prayer. Remember how Jesus taught his disciples when he was here on earth to pray? And he prayed the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. And as she was praying, she thought about that part that said you needed to forgive. Forgive. And you know, when you can't do something that's right, Jesus can help you. And she prayed some more. She said, Jesus, help me to forgive Amy, please. And you know, deep down in her heart, she felt better, so much better. She went to bed and she slept all night. Well, the next day, Nettie had told her mother about what Amy had done. And she told her mother about the battle she'd had in her bedroom and how Jesus had finally helped her to forgive Amy. Now, Mrs. Carter, that was Nettie's mom, was very proud of her daughter, and Nettie set out the door to go to school. She was busy doing her usual tasks in the morning when suddenly, the door opened and there stood Amy. And she said, "Mrs. Carter, did Nettie tell you what I did?" And Mrs. Carter's face was very solemn and sad. She said, "Yes, she told me." And Amy said, "I'm so sorry. Do you think she can ever forgive me? I am trying to make it right." Nettie's mom looked at her kindly. She said, "This is going to be a hard one to fix." And Amy said, "I went this morning to Mr. Mason at the school and I told him what I had done. And he told me to come to you. And if you would write a note to him saying that you had seen her composition and you had read it and you knew that it was a good composition and there were not spelling errors and all kinds of things, and it was neat, there was no blots on it, that he would consider her for a prize. Please, can you do that? Please. Mrs. Carter. She looked at Amy and she said, I'm proud of you. You know, what you did was hasty and mean. Your temper is just like this. You've tried to fix it. And she said, will Nettie ever forgive me? Mrs. Carter smiled. She said, she already did. She and Jesus worked on it. She's forgiven you. Amy sighed with relief. She rushed to go to school. The day came when the prizes were to be handed out, and Mr. Mason walked over. Well, yes, the first prize had been given, that desk had gone to Hetty, but then there were other prizes, and he walked over to Amy, and Amy couldn't figure this out, and he stuck his hand out, and in it was a small Bible, and he said, Amy, you are getting a prize, not for your composition, but because you tried to fix a wrong and you went to fix it with me right away. And then he turned to Nettie and he said, this is for several reasons. One, because I know how hard you study and how hard you must have worked on that composition, but it's for something else. The other day, when the compositions were handed in, and I went to you privately and asked you where yours was, you did not blame anyone. You didn't even tell me the story of what had happened to it. I already knew, but you had to have forgiven Amy for that awful wrong. This prize is for that as well. You know, boys and girls, there's a lot of things in life. Because we live in a sinful world, we have tempers that flare up, we get mad, we get upset, we do things we know we shouldn't. Plus, the people on the receiving end of all that have a choice to make as well. Are you going to forgive that person like Jesus would? Or are you going to carry it with you? Always as something that burns inside of you, the wrong that was done to you. I hope you choose to give that unforgiving spirit to Jesus. And I hope if you're the one that's wronged someone, you'll try to fix it, because that's what Jesus would want you to do. Thank you, boys and girls. I'll see you next week.